Welcome everyone, Cloudfather here. Today we're going to work with glass. In this case we're going to start with some mirror stock. This is glass that comes in a pack of 6 in this container. This is from Lowe's Hardware. This is their plain edge square mirror tiles. It's a 12 by 12 by 1/8 inch. And I don't believe this is tempered glass. This is just pretty standard mirror. So the first thing we got to do is open up our lacquer thinner. Acetone works just as good, but I have this right here, so we'll do it. You only want to use a little bit, just enough to wet it. And we're just taking a quick wipe of the dust. Now, when working with mirrors, you always work with the mirror side down because you're putting a reverse image through the back of the mirror surface, which is basically paint and mirroring compound, which is probably aluminum, and that goes on the back. So again, always face it down. The next thing we're going to do is get the cutting tools out and see if we can cut this down to some small pieces. I'm not real good at cutting, but we'll see how we do. So let's look at cutting tools. This is a pretty traditional, inexpensive, as in cheap, glass cutting tool. It does have a reservoir for oil. Lubricant does help. The problem with these is they get very dirty, and so you got to take a little piece of wire and clean out all the garbage that collects from the wheel. The other problem is when you're cutting mirror glass, you never do it from the back. You do it from the front because the back will immediately gum up these little wheels and cause you problems. Another useful tool in this kind of kit, a kit like this is about 40 bucks from Ben Franklin or Hobby Lobby, is a scribe. The scribe is actually quite good for making straight cuts of glass. This tool is more useful for doing curve cuts, and today we're going to focus on straight cuts. So that's a nice sharp tip. And then we have 2 tools we use for breaking glass up. Once we've scribed a line, we take these and put them so that we can split across the line going this way, say. And what this does, it's a curved edge, and it applies just a very little pressure, and then it will evenly split the glass. Once the glass is split, we use a tool like this to nibble off the edges, and then we use a grinding disc, which I normally use for sharpening TIG welding tips, for taking the rough edges off. And anytime you're working with glass, you always want to wear full eye protection, and you really should wear a filter mask, especially if you're using a grinder. So let's get started. So we're going to flip the glass over. I'm going to go grab my straight edge. Let me go grab a pen real quickly. Okay, so we've marked off our squares. They're basically 150 mils in each direction. Now we're going to get our eye protection on. So we'll take the straight edge, which seems to be the easiest way to do this, line it up with a slight offset, and then we're going to use, I think I'll go with the scribe for this shot. Let's see, where did I hide it? Okay, the scribe is located, so we're going to line up our stuff here. We're going to take this at an angle. And you can actually hear it scribing. And if we look carefully, you'll see a nice clean scribe line there. Now, depending on the thickness of the glass, you might need to scribe it several times, which I'm going to do here. And our goal is to try to get it right back in the same place. Okay, so that's scribed pretty well. Now we're going to try this again, going the other way. And of course, you can hear the scribing. When you hear that sound, then you know you've gotten through the glass. Okay, gonna get my gloves on here. Again, anytime you cut glass, wear gloves. Wear protective eyewear. And if you're gonna grind glass, always wear a face mask. Okay, time for the, see how this worked. Now what we're doing is we're slightly elevating glass at an angle. This has the curved surface. We're going to see if we can get it to crack. Sometimes it'll do it right away, sometimes it's very stubborn. Try it from the other side here. And again, this is thicker glass than I've been cutting, so it may take several attempts to get this so it cracks properly. I've watched tons of videos on master glass guys, and they're so good at this. What looks so simple is really pretty difficult. So we'll go back and try it with this other tool. See if we can get a little cleaner engrave. Get it all lined up here. Sometimes it's just right at the very edge is the hardest part. There we go. Wasn't perfect, but we at least got two pieces. Again, when you're working with glass for the first time, just assume you're going to break 90% of it. But the basics aren't too bad. You can see the uneven fracture here. So we didn't put enough pressure on the glass to scribe this thick of glass. The other stuff I was using was half this. So let's finish this piece. Make sure we have everything lined up here. Okay, now let's see if we can split the glass. Now in terms of prepping for the laser, there's not a lot to do, because all we're going to do is split the glass, and this tool here is used to take off these edges. And again, make absolutely sure you have eye protection. And what you're doing is chipping off at the scribe line. Now the other thing is don't throw away pieces that you screwed up, because you can always make smaller projects out of them. And in fact, if you're doing like a mirror project where you need lots of odd-shaped pieces, this is where you get them from. So now we have a rough edge. I'm going to go get my filter mask on, and then I'll show you how we grind these. Okay, we're back with all of our proper kit on. We're going to fire up the grinder. And again, face mask, wraparound goggles, gloves. What we're doing is just grinding off basically taking all the edges off so that you don't cut yourself constantly. So we basically ground off the edges and we ground the corners so that they're less sharp, and it's just for safety reasons more than anything else. So a quick note on safety equipment. This is an L100 or a P100 filter mask. It's good for 1 micron. This is a blue laser, 455 nanometer, optical density 6+ full-size goggles. These are the best because they keep dirt and debris out of your eyes as well as protect you from the laser. Then of course a good set of gloves for handling your glass. Okay, we have put the glass in the chamber. The glass is about 150 square roughly. It's not perfect. We're going to run just kind of a mosaic, random mosaic image. We're going to run grayscale mode. Well, actually I think I'm going to go to trace, or we'll go to trace mode, or sketch rather. Sketch is pretty good for this. We're going to run 329 DPI. Overscan at 25%. We're going to run a positive image because all we want is the outline of this. We're going to do a single pass. And maximum power, I think we'll try our first pass at about 30. I have worked with this material for a while, so we need to figure out what the right balance is going to be, and if needed, we'll take additional passes at a speed of roughly 10,000 until we get it tuned in for getting just enough heat to take the paint off and take the mirroring off, but we don't want to microfracture the glass. We want to keep that as simple as possible because we're just doing outlines. Now, if we were engraving glass, we would have painted the glass with tempera paint, using a high volume, low pressure detail paint gun. So we get a very, very even 3 to 4 coats, and we would let that dry for a day. Since we're working with mirrors, we already have the coating on. And with mirrors, we're not taking most of the mirror out, we're simply taking the outline out. So it's kind of the opposite approach for that. So if you're just working with the mirror in this way, if you're doing lettering, you need to reverse the image. If you're not doing lettering, it really doesn't matter. So we're going to go ahead and start that. This should be fairly quick. And away it goes. So we'll check back in about 25 minutes. Okay, so let's take a look. So we probably need to run this another pass. If you hold it up to the light, you're going to see that there's still quite a bit of the mirroring. We got about 50% off at 30%. I think I'm going to run it again at 50% because my goal is to get these areas clean. Now, I did earlier this morning use one of the tile pieces from the other day, and we're going to go through and actually apply alcohol link to this to add a little bit of additional depth and color. And we're going to do the same thing to the glass. So let's fire this thing up again and see if we can clear this up slightly. Okay, we're now setting the mirror up for another pass. I'm going to go with 60. Actually, I think I'll go 24,000 and I'll go 80%. That way it won't take quite as long, but I think we'll get the cleaning that we need done with that. That's really what we're after. The downside of this is running at 80% may crack the glass. As this is the first test piece, that's one of the things we want to find out. So we've got that started. The next thing we're going to do is start playing with alcohol ink. And we're going to do that on this piece of tile, which is one of our tile test pieces. And the interesting thing about alcohol ink is it's really fun to work with because it does some unusual things. Now, one of the things I use for a palette is use DVD or CDs. And what's nice about them is it's easy to put a drop of alcohol ink and then take a paintbrush and dab it. Now I have two types here. I have Pinata, and I also have the stuff from Tim Holtz, his ink. Both are really excellent alcohol inks. Now if you notice the ink, when I put it on here, it's unlike anything you've ever used for a paint or anything else. It immediately spreads out and it dries really quickly. So what we're going to do is just put a little bit on a brush. And we're going to find an area to put a little color on. And the beauty of alcohol ink is if you fairly deeply etched, you can actually get a pretty nice fine controlled line. So if you notice what we have here now, you can see how the alcohol ink is starting to fill stuff in. And so then you can have fun just creating. So I'm just rinsing this out. And I usually start with the lighter colors first because the lighter colors, while brilliant, are not as, shall we say, overwhelming as the darker colors are. So we're going this time with a little bit of Tucson Sun. It's kind of a yellow-orange color. And the fun thing is you can actually overlap the colors. This stuff mixes beautifully, so if you want to build a complex thing, you can actually take a little dab here, a little dab there, and create intermediate colors. So you can see now that the intermediate color is a much brighter kind of orange red from the pink and the yellow. So there's a lot of flexibility in color. Now I find that a really fine tip Japanese art brush, this thing's probably about a mil or a mil and a half maybe, is ideal for doing this kind of work. And so now we're just going to keep adding colors onto the palette, going from lightest to darkest. And we just put a single drop on it. You'd be amazed how far a single drop goes. The other thing to think about is this stuff dries really fast. The warmer that it is in the room, the quicker it's going to be. So this is coral. I'm going to intersect a little yellow, and then we'll intersect the mix of the paint. Then we're going to take coral, yellow, and pink, create yet another color. And as you can see, you can really change the color. This stuff's really fun to mix. Or as my granddaughter would say, it gives me endless hours of entertainment. Let's try a little flamingo. Now this works on all materials. You get a different effect when you're doing a porous material like a wood or certain forms of tile which are highly porous. And you get an entirely different effect running something that has a smooth surface like glass. So again, this is really good for doing outlines. It makes beautiful stained glass, which is what we're going to show a little later. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is when you use alcohol ink, you got to be real careful what you use for a clear. Because if you use Rust-Oleum or those types of clears, you'll get an ugly mess. So the best clears are a clear that's specifically designed for alcohol ink. So we'll try a little green here, or teal. And I don't know if you can see that, but you can see how the colors flow into each other, which is one of the fun parts of alcohol ink. You can rapidly change the viscosity, and you can change the color mix on the fly, which makes it interesting to paint with. Takes a little practice, but then I also experiment mixing dark and light colors together, colors that are not complementary in the color wheel, to get some interesting effects, to darken, to get things like a black color, which I just made here. So you can really get nice variations in shading and transitions with the alcohol ink. You can also layer it. You can add multiple layers of the alcohol ink to get deeper and more robust colors. Now I'll try one of the power colors, which is basically all the blues and purples. One drop goes a really long way. The kit here is about, I think I got about $60 in it between the two vendors. I tried quite a few different vendors of the inks, and the Tim Holtz ones and the other one are the two that were most cost effective, and I still haven't run out of them. I've been using these for 4 months. And when you've seen some of the artwork that I do, I also use a Q-tip, where we just use a dabbing action to get certain effects. So you can see the purple's really intense stuff. And I'm cutting this down with isopropyl alcohol. Yeah, let's try a little marine blue. And again, if you love playing with colors, these are a lot more fun than trying to inkjet print, because you're actually doing something rather than just printing a design. You're actually creating artwork. Yeah, this is a real pretty blue. And just look at the intensity of these colors. It's very difficult to see probably on the camera, but if you're sitting right on top of these are spectacular. And again, you absolutely want to coat them with the right clear before you put them out and people get fingerprints on them. Alcohol ink will evaporate over time if you haven't sealed it. But getting the right sealer is the trick. And I use this on wood, both hardwoods and softwoods. A lot of times I will do a semi-deep engrave. And what that does is creates a little channel. And I have previously done a shellac coating in order to seal the wood. And then the only wood that is exposed is right where it's ingrained. And that allows the alcohol ink to deeply soak into the colors. Now, another interesting thing that alcohol ink has are these beautiful pearls and brass and coppers and golds. They're great for doing accents on, particularly on graphic images, where you might have a wood cutting and then you want to do just a little hint of embellishment. Another trick is when you're doing these, if you want a really brilliant color, you basically use white underneath it first. If you want a really dark color, use a gray or a black as a primer. When you're using the metallics, usually they work well on darker colors or pure whites, because you can see the contrast difference. So now we can see with just some little fooling around, we have a nice mix of colors. If you use a Q-tip, you can do it a little more accurately. I was just striving to kind of get a test panel put together here so you could see some of the effects. Now, the other interesting thing is the rest of this is 3 layers of Rust-Oleum paint of various colors. It's important to let them dry at least 24 hours. Otherwise, the paint doesn't stay. It tends to dissolve the minute you try to clean it. And part of what I'm doing here is one of the things that's very difficult to get to eliminate is actually you always have a little paint debris because the surface is never level. So the way we combat that is we can either run multiple passes till you get it down to where it's pure substrate color, which frequently is not white. And that'll take all the little marks out where material has not quite evaporated. So that's another strategy for going in and adding more detail, cleaning. Now, since this is a graphic image, one of the other things I could do is put it back in, because I have alignment marks to make realigning it easy, and actually go over it with grayscale at a high speed at maybe 50 or so in 35 watt mode. And that will sharpen all the images up. It will flatten down the rough spots, but then I would lose a lot of the multicolored paint depth if I did that. So it's kind of a trade-off. So those are some of the things you can do with alcohol ink when you're working with a tile. As soon as the glass piece is done, we're going to basically do the same exercise on that. And we'll be able to see how you can make a really nice stained glass effect with that can either be backlit or naturally lit. Okay, as we can see, we now have a well-defined, nicely detailed engrave in the back of the mirror surface. So now the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to build a little bit of this. This is where we've taken the alcohol ink and painted stripes across a scene of basalt rocks. This is over by the Columbia River near the Veneta Bridge to create a beautiful mirrored effect. This was done with the reverse image. We're working with now is the positive image, but this is some of the examples of what you can do with alcohol ink, mirrors, and your laser. So let's take a seat here and go play with some inks. So again, I usually start with the brighter colors. Now you can, it takes a little practice, but you can directly apply these inks, just like that. And then you can let the ink, see how it's flowing? And this is a really cool stuff about this ink. It's really a fun way to apply it. And of course, then it'll dry in place. And then when we flip the piece over, you can now see that we have a nice yellow tint. And so we just continue to experiment with various different colors. And again, you can use the palette technique, or you can just use the random drop technique. And it's really fun how this just grows as it dries. So again, we can, put colors at opposite ends and let them naturally flow. And so you can see we're creating some fun effects with that. Again, we can take the brush and put some of the power colors on, like purple, where we do a technique of both brush and dropping. And that's what you do if you want to get really, really intense colors. And of course, the only thing you're going to see, if we can get it to show up in the mirror, I'm not sure how bright this is, but depending on how you look at it, you can see we get a very nice, clear color. And again, you art experts who are much better at this than I am, can take advantage of that and build some really colorful stuff. So again, we'll add another little drop here and let that saturate. Another little trick is just take the piece and wiggle it around. You can also mix colors, which is what I'm doing now. Again, when you flip it up, you can see the delicate colors that are being made. I have a little bit of white, but this probably won't work well on this, but we'll play with it anyhow. Just for drill, we'll go find ourselves a quiet little corner over here. Now the white's very different from all the other colors because the white is opaque. And that's really useful if I want to blend colors and lighten them up. And you can do this on a top or a bottom layer. But now we have a milk white effect that we're starting. And we'll add a little yellow with the intersection. We're just going to let this one flow a little bit. We do that just by tilting the material. It actually dries very quickly. You can even get it to turn corners, which is kind of fun. And so now we've got a really nice little yellow corner there that's all drying with a little bit of white accent behind it. And of course you can mix it with the brush, which is what I'm doing here, to create yet another effect. And of course you can layer effects. So one of my favorite colors is actually their pinks. Their pinks are really vibrant. And so we'll do the same thing. We'll let the pink take a little walk down the workpiece here. So you can see we're allowing the pink to merge with the yellow and letting it flow to create different transitions. You can throw a little pearl on here. Again, pearl is not the best for this. Pearl works better on mostly woods, hard soft woods. You can put a little drop of pearl on, and you got to remember to shake it because it's an emulsion. There we go. There's some pearl, and this is great for doing starlight scenes or doing sunsets where you want a nice sparkle effect. And it's very difficult to see on camera, but it's actually sparkling in real time. I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of bubbling, and as it flows, it sparkles, and then it eventually solidifies and dries. And again, you can kind of just work it around and play with it. And that's what's so different between this and regular paints. Regular paints are much more thick than this type of paint, and so you get very different behaviors as you apply paint to materials. And so here we're just using the dropper technique. And then we can use the brush to thin that out, to mix it, to balance it out. And I'm starting to do layers of different areas, which will give different color effects. So you have a tremendous amount of control with this. The darker colors are great for taking care of defects. My grandmother always used to say, if you have an artistic defect, turn it into art. That way you never waste materials. So here we're trying a little bit of the brass, which is, I take that back, it's copper. And this is another great example of what you can do with the metallic side of the house of these paints. And there's about 200 different variants of this kind of paint. Tim Holtz, who's really the guy who invented this, about half of what I'm using here is his stuff. And he makes a really large catalog through Ranger, who is the company that produces them for him, of all kinds of alcohol inks, including distressed inks and so on, for getting a very wide variation of colors and textures. And so this application really is kind of a mix of mirror engraving, but we're also building a stained glass effect at the same time. So when we coat this with something, again, you have to use a clear that is compatible with alcohol ink. Now, cleanup on this is either ethanol, which is best because it immediately dissolves this stuff, and the blending solution is another thing you can use. This is from Tim Holtz as well, available from, what's the name of the company? Ranger Industries. And again, there's the Pinata, which is also available. You'll find these in Hobby Lobby, Benjamin Franklin, and other art stores. They cater to people that do painting. You can also mix these with acrylic and get multiple layered effects. So those are some of the things that we can do by mixing lasers, excuse me, with acrylic paints. And in the end, we start getting things that are very nice to backlit, and you can just add a whole nother dimension to your art. So again, you've seen an example on tile. You've seen a normal image example, front and back. I'm going to leave this way because it's not dry yet. This stuff dries in minutes. And this is a reverse image on a mirror, on Fred Flintstone mirrors. I basically couldn't cut them straight, so I smoothed them all up and ground them and turned them into Flintstone art. And you can see just simply rows and rows of a regular color to form the detail background of the mirrored surface. So there's some examples of some fun things you can try. Professor Cloudfather out.